Hey guys, FilthyRobot here with another tips and tricks video. This time I want to talk about ideologies and how to pick the best ideology for you and what to be thinking about when you're picking your ideologies. First and foremost, let's just do a little bit of a recap here. There's two ways to get an ideology. The first way to get an ideology is to tech up to industrialization, have some coal, improve your coal, and build 3 factories across your empire. It doesn't matter how many cities you have. If you have 2 cities, you can't build 3 factories clearly, so you can't do it this way. But if you have more than 2 cities, and the longer you build a factory, at least in 3 different cities, the turn after that you will be granted access to an ideology. The other way to get an ideology is to enter the modern era. You can enter the modern era through any one of the ways to enter modern from. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is get into the modern era, and the turn after you get into the modern era, you'll be offered access to an ideology. The ideologies, there's 3 of them. The way they work is that the first person to take one of the ideologies is given 2 free tenants. The second person to take that same ideology is given 1 free tenant, and the third person to take every person past that who takes that same ideology is given no free tenants. This means that it's really important to be one of the first 2 people to open up an ideology because you're going to be given social policies for free. And tenets are exactly the same as social policies, except they're specific to the ideology. So for some reason Civ calls these social policies, like any one of these, and it calls any one of these in here tenets. So fair enough. Let's talk about the reasons to choose an ideology. Let's start broad. Let's start kind of big picture here. Let's think top down, right? So when we're taking a top-down approach to this, we're really thinking about a guided approach to this, like a kind of methodical, why are we taking these, what are we getting from them? There's really 2 reasons to pick an ideology. The first is necessity. So sometimes you are forced to pick something. You might be forced to pick it for a variety of reasons. Perhaps you're at war with someone and you're gonna die and you really just need any sort of military help you can get, and the only tenet in basically all of the ideologies that gives you immediate military help is volunteer army, where you get 6 foreign legions immediately. So let's say, you know, this is necessity. This is necessity making that decision for you. To win the game, you have to be in the game. To be in the game, you have to not get wiped out by this player. You might have wanted to go order, you might have thought long-term autocracy is going to help me more, but right this instant I have to have volunteer army, I'm going to die without it. Okay? So there it is. There's necessity making a choice for you. Sometimes happiness is a necessity thing. So perhaps you are really unhappy. Let's say you're a late adopter into these ideologies, so other people have picked up ideologies before you, and you're trying to make a decision between a couple kind of mediocre choices, and you really wanted one thing, but a couple other people have gone that, and you're sitting there going, I will not be able to have happiness in this game. I will be happiness crippled for the rest of the game if I don't follow the guy who has the World Congress, for example. So, you know, let's say that someone has picked up order and you really wanted to go order, but the guy who has all the votes in the World Congress, the guy who's going to force world ideology down everyone else's throat, has gone freedom, and your happiness is just not going to be able to survive doing anything but freedom. So again, another kind of necessity choice. In those cases, you might get forced into an ideology, and it's worth noticing. It's worth acknowledging that sometimes that happens, and that's fine. You can still win games if you're forced into an ideology. It's just you need to be kind of aware of when you need to do that versus when you don't. The other reason to pick an ideology, and this is the major reason why I pick ideologies, and most people probably pick ideologies, is for the grand strategy. So what is your grand strategy for the game? How are you planning to win, and what ideology best helps you? And that's going to be the bulk of this video. We're talking about how each of these ideologies can contribute to wins. I'll talk about the major strategies that I play using each of these different ideologies. So we'll just do it in order. We'll start with autocracy. Autocracy does 3 or 4 things fairly well. I have over here on my other browser, or my other, monitor, I have a list of each of I have all 3 of them in spreadsheets, of course, because this is how I think about things, and look at kind of what autocracy does and what it does well. This is the autocracy tenets broken down by the various types of things they do, and this is the autocracy tenets broken down by the tier list. The tier list is exactly the same as in Civ. in Civ tier list, and we'll probably look at the in Civ tier list. It's a little bit prettier to look at, but just I wanted to kind of point this out. Really, Autocracy does a couple things well. It does unit purchasing well, it does happiness well, it does the culture win, which is probably one of the few ways to get a realistic culture win in this game fairly well. It does this with futurism. It does spying well, and it has a very nice happiness wonder that is particularly easy to get. Alright, that's kind of what Autocracy does. And plugging that into how you win a game, let's talk about what tenets will do that for you, or what will help you do that. So this is probably the premier reason to go Autocracy right here. Mobilization, cost of purchasing units is reduced by 33%. At some point in the near future, I'm going to do a video talking about the various resources. It seems very straightforward: production, gold, and growth. But I want to talk kind of how that plays out throughout the game. But mobilization, basically what this tenet does, and this is a combination, purchasing units in general, what it lets you do is it lets you stockpile a kind of flexible resource, which is gold. Gold in of itself is fairly inefficient. It takes a lot of gold to purchase a unit, and in general your gold is not as much as your hammers, so it's generally better to just be building the units. But what mobilization lets you do, and other forms of unit purchasing, is it lets you get to a specific game-changing military unit and then produce a bunch of those instantly. And that's like, it's basically like, it's an inefficient way to stockpile hammers that you can distribute instantaneously when you reach a certain tech. Mobilization, there's 3 purchasing modifiers in this game. The first is mobilization. It's an Autocracy. It's the largest modifier. It's a 33% modifier. There is also in the commerce called mercantilism, which is a 25% modifier. And there is the Wonder Big Ben, which is available industrialization. You have to have 1 point commerce to build it, and it is a 15% purchase modifier. They don't all stack, or they all do stack, but they stack kind of weirdly. The mercantilism bonus and the Big Ben bonus are additive, so you can just think of it, if you have both of those, if you have just mercantilism, which is a 25% bonus, your units cost 75% of their normal cost. If you have mercantilism and Big Ben, you add that together, 25 and 15 is 40, so it's 60% of the total cost. The mobilization is a multiplier, so it multiplies by 0.33, but it does not stack additively with the other ones. So if you have all 3, let me just pull the calculator out. You add the first 2 together, so that's 60%, and then it's 33% of, or rather it's 66% of 60, which means that it comes out to about 40% total, 0.396 to be exact. So basically, if you have all 3 of those modifiers, your units only cost 40% of what they would normally cost otherwise. Now, that's a big difference. And actually, it's just a pretty big difference. I mean, if you just do it with the mobilization, if you didn't get Big Ben, you don't have the culture for commerce. If you just have mobilization from Autocracy, you're still getting units at 67% of their base cost, which is also a pretty big difference. So what this lets you do, this tenet is probably the strongest tenet in Autocracy, or rather, if you're going purchasing, this is the strongest tenet in Autocracy. And what it's going to let you do is very quickly produce a critical military unit at a very specific time in the game. And you can do this from any city. So if you have a couple kind of weaker production coastal cities and you suddenly need to have subs or nuclear subs or battleships or something like this, you can purchase them fairly quickly out of that city, even though that city has low or 0 production. What else does Autocracy do well? So these are, let's talk about the T1 tenets. Maybe what I'll do is I'll walk through the tenets and then talk about kind of how they plug into various win conditions. Elite forces is garbage. Don't ever pick up this tenet. The problem with this is that it's not that wounded military units don't get all that much of a reduction in damage. Anyways, the maximum reduction in damage for wounded military units at a military unit at 1 hit point does 50% damage. This is just a 25% more damage than normal modifier. On top of that, this is basically Japan's ability, which is terrible, and this is 1/4. This is not 1/4. This is a weaker version of Japan's ability, and it's total fucking garbage. Don't ever pick this up. It's really bad. It's going to be so situational and so minimal that it's going to have no impact on the game. Mobilization we already talked about. United Front, military city-states grant units twice as often when you're at war with the common foe. Don't pick this up. I mean, maybe if you have like I don't know, you have like 4 military city-state allies and they're all granting you something amazing, like XCOM or something, you know, maybe then this is worth picking up. But in general, it's not worth picking up. It's just too situational and too rare that this set of events occurs together. Futurism, this is a very specific ability. It has 2 main uses. The first is defending against enemy ideology pressure. So if you are really, really happiness stretched, and Autocracy has the best policies for happiness, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you are happiness pressed and you have someone's ideology which is pressuring you very heavily, futurism is a great way to very cheaply push that pressure back and make that a little less painful for you. It's also pretty much the only way to get a culture victory in multiplayer these days. So this is also, we'll talk about this later, this is one of the grand strategy choices you're going to pick up if you are going Autocracy. This would be for a cultural win. Industrial espionage, one of my favorite tenets in the game. This is spies steal technologies at twice the rate. This allows you to put spies in non-capital cities and actually get spies that one day will steal technologies. And this can be really big if you're a little bit behind in tech or you are recovering. So like say you had a mid or early game war and you're catching up to tech leaders where you're going to be huge in the late game. This is one of the ways in which you can keep up to speed, keep modern in a kind of timely fashion. Fortified borders is absolutely worthless. 1 happiness from castles, arsenals, and military bases just isn't good. You don't build castles, arsenals, and military bases in your cities, so this tends to be almost no bonus. It needs to include walls as well, really, to be anything. Local happiness from national wonders, that's not very much happiness. This tends to be somewhere like between the vicinity of 4 to 6 happiness, which is something, but it's not a lot. Sometimes I will pick up universal healthcare if I'm really, really happiness shy and I don't have any other choices. The way tenets work is you have to have 2 tier 1 tenets before you can have a tier 2. You have to have 3 tier 1 tenets before you can have 2 tier 2s, 4 to 3, etc. And then the same pattern for the tier 2s and the tier 3s. So you have to have 2 tier 2s before you can have 1 tier 3. The tier 2 tenets in Autocracy, militarism, this policy right here is the best single happiness policy in the game for any ideology and any pretty much anything, basically. This is 2 local happiness for each barracks, armory, and military academy. This is the equivalent in most cities as Autocracy. You're going to have at least a barracks and an armory, so this almost always is a single tenant that gives you 4 happiness per local happiness per city, and often 6 local happiness per city. If you are struggling, if you know that late game you are going to be struggling with happiness, or you're going to get world ideology by someone and you need to survive that, or something like that, militarism is where you want to go. There's so much happiness in this. Lightning warfare is kind of cool, but it's you don't ever have the time to pick this up. There's too many other good tier 2 tenets that you have to pick up instead. It's a really cool ability. Armor units, which are tank units, basically gain 15% attack plus 1 movement. Both of these things are really, really cool for armor units, and ignore enemy zone of control. They can't be zone of control. It makes them so much more mobile. It's really, really cool. And your generals get a great 3 movement. Who cares? But this you can't use this. There's never a time when you can pick this up over the other tenets and that be a stronger option, which kind of sucks. Police state. 3 local happiness from every courthouse. Build courthouses in half the usual time. Meh, who cares? You're probably only going to have realistically a couple courthouses in the game, and there's much stronger T2 tenets. Nationalism, reduce unit gold maintenance cost by 33%. It's actually surprisingly a big deal for the amount of gold it is that it gives you, but again, you're not going to be able to take that. Realistically, maybe I should talk, well, I'll talk about that in a second. Let's finish the Autocracy roundup, and then we'll talk about kind of social policies in general. Third alternative, quantity of strategic resources is increased by 100%, plus 5 food, plus 5 science in the capital. That's okay, but again, probably not going to get a chance to get it. Sometimes you have to because you absolutely need those strategic resources for something. Sometimes, for example, if you're doing a battleship push, for example, that you may need this, but it's pretty rare I get that. And then total war is the other really big T2 tenet for Autocracy. And this is 25 production when building military units, which is a ton of production, and even better, new military units start with 15 experience. This means that the way that promotions work, and I just have to reference my list over here, is to get 1 promotion, you need a barracks. To get 2 promotions, you need a barracks and an armory. To get 3 promotions on creation, you need a barracks, an armory, a military academy, and 1 other 15 experience modifier. So if you have total war, and you have total war in your empire, which is this tenet right here, and you have the 3 military buildings, the barracks, armory, and military academy, all your units will come out triple promoted from every city that has those 3 buildings. And triple promotion is a very big one. That means you can get air repair at the start. This means if you have Alhambra or you have any of the units that have the single promotion built into them, you can produce units with Blitz or March or other incredibly powerful promotions. Finally, the level 3 tenets, cult of personality is nothing. This is not anything in multiplayer, I should say. Gunboat diplomacy, I would love to try this. I have not had a chance to realistically use this. It seems like it could be pretty cool, mostly because of the second part. Your military forces are 50% more effective at intimidating city-states. I feel like you could gather a lot of tribute, and this might be a nice bonus to stack if you already have mobilization or purchasing units to very easily tribute city-states. That would be pretty cool. But I have a feeling that it's just not worth, that the opportunity cost of picking up gunboat diplomacy is too high. And then Clausewitz Legacy, this is just a 25% attack modifier for 50 turns. This is going to be basically till the end of the game once you pick this up. And that's a fairly good ability as well. However, all of these things have opportunity costs, and I don't know if you guys know what an opportunity cost is. It's basically the cost associated with taking an option when you account for the benefits of other options. So by taking, like, for example, all of these policies are nice. If I had an infinite number of policies, I'd probably take every one of these policies, but I don't. I have a limited number of policies, and that means every time I pick up a policy, I'm essentially removing my ability to take another policy. So there's an opportunity cost associated with the policies I do take. Generally, in the games that you're going to be playing in Civ 5 multiplayer no quitters group, you're going to end up filling out tradition or liberty. You're going to end up taking a couple filler policies somewhere in the patronage, piety, honor, exploration, commerce, or aesthetic tree. And then you're going to want to eventually fill out rationalism. And you're going to want to fill out rationalism because the end bonus of rationalism is made to purchase great scientists with faith. And you get a free tech for scientific revolution. And free thought gives you another 17. It gives you another percentage modifier to your science, and secularism gives you base, just raw science for a specialist. You pretty much, to stay competitive with the very strong players, rationalism is incredibly important. You can't get away from that, and finishing either tradition or liberty is extremely important. What you find then is you don't have enough points. You don't have enough social policies throughout the game, except with some rare exceptions, like, for example, Poland, to easily fill out rationalism, to also get all the tenets you want in your ideology, and also to fill out the trees that you have to fill out early. So you're going to be limited on social policies, and therefore the social policy decisions you make are going to be particularly important to how your gameplay plays out. And this should be one of the things you're thinking about when you choose your ideology, is how many tenets am I likely to have time to get? How many can I afford? Mostly what I find is that if I plan for being able to afford between 3 and 5, and that 3 to 5 tenets basically does either, it lets you either get, just open this up, 3 tenets lets you get the 2 base ones, the 2 level 1s, and 1 level 2. 5 tenets lets you get 3 level 1s and 2 level 2s. And pretty much after that, or even around that, I tend to either go for 3 tenets and then try to fill out rationalism, or sometimes 5 tenets and fill out rationalism, depending on my strategy. But it's pretty unlikely that you'll get many more than that. And you should be thinking about that, because yeah, I would love to, every time I go Autocracy, I would love to pick up Clausewitz Legacy, I'd love to pick up Gunboat Diplomacy, but in all likelihood I'm not going to have the tenets to actually pick these up, because there's too many other important things I'm going to need to pick up elsewhere. Okay, so grand strategy wise, Autocracy basically helps you with a cultural victory. It helps you for surviving happiness issues, and it helps you for utilizing gold purchasing to force very particularly powerful military units down someone's throat instantaneously, basically. Things like atom bombs, things like battleships, things like XCOM, things like bombers, stuff like this. Stuff that's really, really, really powerful. Freedom. And your game, so let's think about some of the things that would help decide that you're going to try to go one of those strategies. Clearly, if you're going a cultural strategy, you need futurism for that. Basically, the cultural strategy with futurism is designed around delaying your guilds until you enter when you're doing a cultural strategy with Autocracy, what you want to do is basically you want to enter the modern era through radio, this being the quickest modern policy to pick up. If you look, this is slightly messed up because I've already opened radio, but if you go to replaceable parts, it takes 40 techs from the beginning of the game. Go to flight, takes 39. Go to railroad, it's 43. Go to refrigeration, 41. And radio is 34 techs to get into from the start of the game. So in other words, it is 5 techs cheaper to get into radio than it is to get into any other modern era tech. And that's why people enter the modern era through radio, because it's the quickest tech to get into the modern era from. If you enter them, and one of the strategies that is quite popular right now is a futurism it's a tourism win. It's a futurism tourism win, and basically how it works is you delay building your guilds until fairly late into the game, and then you very early, probably not your first grade scientist, but probably your second and third, you're basically trying to just bulb bulb scientists, so use them for their instant science bonus, and Oxford as quickly as possible into radio. Basically, you want to have your guilds built sometime like as you're approaching radio, and have them worked up so that the turn after you pick your ideology, you will be producing 1 musician, 1 artist, and 1 writer. And what happens is the futurism bonus, which is 250 tourism, and this is unmodified by anything, so game speed doesn't affect this. None of the normal tourism modifiers affect this. So basically, on turn 1 of having Autocracy, you generate 750 tourism, and then 6 to 10 turns later, you generate another 750 tourism from producing another writer, artist, and musician. And then you build a couple of these wonders that do the same thing. You build things like the Louvre, Uffizi, wherever the fuck that is. It's over here. The other ones that produce these great people, and you go for a tourism win. Anyways. So Autocracy is good for that. Autocracy is good for the happiness. Autocracy is good for the unit purchasing. Autocracy is good for the spy bonus. Those are kind of the things that Autocracy does very well. Prora is a nice, accessible wonder. It requires you be coastal to get it, but it has a lot of happiness on it. And both Prora and the other one, I've already forgotten the name of it, militarism, do a huge job of keeping you happy with Autocracy. There's more happiness in Autocracy than there is in any other ideology, including order. Basically, this tenant right here, the problem with this is it's a T2 tenant. So as soon as you open up, or the minute you open up Autocracy, you get the 2 free tenants. The 2 free tenants have very little happiness in them because there aren't a lot of good T1 Autocracy tenants for happiness. Something like this National Wonder thing is going to be a very small amount of happiness. Really, it's wait till you get to T2, but there's more happiness in Autocracy than there is in anything else. Additionally, the tech path to get Prora is fairly reasonable. Prora is available at Flight, and Flight tends to be something that you get fairly early. People tend to enter the modern through one of 2 paths. They tend to enter either through radio or replaceable parts, heading on their way to plastics, and after plastics they tend to go Flight. Sometimes there's a little bit of a change in the order around these, but either way, Flight tends to be fairly accessible. This is in stark contrast to the Kremlin, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is a very difficult to access wonder because it's so late in the tech path. People tend to go Flights, plastic, electronics, atomic theory, then come back through dynamite and into railroad to get up this way, and this means this is a lot later. Alright, let's talk the next ideology, freedom. Freedom has a couple things going for it. Let's talk through its tenets. The first tenet here is avant-garde. This is nice. This is 25% great people. That's fine. T1 tenet. Creative expression, +1 culture for each great work, but tourism is unchanged. This is worthless. This is a very, very small cultural bonus, even if you have all your people who are made into great works, which you never do anyways, so this is totally garbage. Civil society, this is probably the strongest T1 tenet that freedom actually has. Specialists consume only half the normal amount of food. A specialist is just like a normal citizen of your empire. They take 2 food just to exist. So a specialist now only takes 1 food. So basically you can think of that when you're working specialist slots. Let's say you're working a university specialist slot, which is 3 science. You can think of that tile as now being a 1 food 3 science tile instead of just a 3 science tile. Covert action, the chance of rigging election in city-states is doubled. This is a very specific bonus. What this actually means is that when you have spies in a city-state, they do what's called, I think the actual code is something like counting votes or something like this, and basically higher level spies do this better, and the longer a spy is in there for the election cycle, the more chances he gets at that. So he collects a certain number of votes per turn. So let's say 2 spies are in the city from the get-go, so they're in there the same amount of time. The higher level spy collects more votes. All this does is doubles the amount of votes they collect. So it lets lower level spies compete with higher level spies, and it lets lower level spies have a better percentage chance versus equal level spies have a better percentage chance to rig the elections in your favor. It's a pretty weak tenet. It really doesn't do a lot. Capitalism, this is probably my other favorite T1 tenet for for freedom. I like avant-garde, I like civil society, and I like capitalism. Capitalism is one happiness for every mint, bank, and stock exchange. I tend to actually build banks. I tend to build stock exchanges if I can. It really depends on the timing, but this is realistically between 1 and 2, sometimes 1 and 3. It's very rare that I have mints. 1 and 3 happiness per city, so that's okay. Freedom's biggest weakness is it has almost no happiness in the entire tree. So if you're going freedom, you need to be pretty assured that you have happiness sources elsewhere that are not ideology based. Economic union, 3 gold from other civs following the freedom. This sounds amazing in something like single player. It's fairly bad in multiplayer. You're just not going to be trading with civs because people will war with you. The only time this is particularly good is if one of your opponents has left the game and you have an AI near your borders who you can trade with, who's fairly friendly, who also happens to have freedom, and this is like, you know, when cows fly, basically. It's not anything. Local happiness from every national wonder, again, it's a fairly weak but fairly consistent happiness boost of something like 4 to 6. Volunteer army, this is really good for a timing push. If you can get Foreign Legion infantry, which are basically Great War infantry, these are basically Great War infantry that become as strong as regular infantry outside of your borders. If you can get this at a certain critical moment when you are pushing someone, if you can get this early, so if you have gone for like a modern era entry or you're way ahead in tech, these units are very hard to stop if you don't have units of roughly equivalent strength. So this is the strongest when you do a timing push with it, when you deliberately decide to make these units plus some sort of backup. Crossbows or artillery, for example, are very strong backup with these guys so that you can push into cities. They can be very strong in that timing. Urbanization, I don't think I've ever gotten this. This is 1 happiness from every watermill, hospital, medical lab. Hospitals and medical labs you don't tend to build very often, and when you do, they're very, very late in the game. I can't remember ever building a medical lab. I have built hospitals before. Watermills you tend to build a lot of. But again, this is a T2 tenet, and you're probably, when you're opening up these trees, you should be thinking, what am I trying to go for? And I don't see a strategy that really requires this to be a T2 tenet from. Their finest hour, the combat strength of cities increased by 33%. Again, I've seen a couple players go this now. It certainly makes cities super annoying. They get really, really, really tanky. But that's not all that good. If you have really tanky cities, you're banking on people attacking you in your lands, attacking your cities, which probably means you're losing anyways. And when you get to something like nukes, nukes don't care how strong a city is. Nukes just take percentage damage to cities, so not that strong. Universal suffrage, this is actually fairly good, but again, I don't know that I ever get time to build this. Specialists in cities produce half the normal amount of unhappiness, great. And golden ages are 50% longer. This tends to be a lot of happiness across your empire. This is the largest happiness boost in the freedom tree at all, the freedom tenet, freedom ideology. But it's a tier 2 tenet, and it's not as much as either the order happiness or the autocracy happiness. So if you're trying to go happiness, this isn't the way to go. And if you're trying to go freedom, there better be a reason why you're choosing freedom. And the T1 tenets are so generic, they don't do enough of anything to really be that meaningful. Really, you're probably picking freedom for one of the T2 tenets, and if you're picking freedom for one of the T2 tenets, you can't pick up universal suffrage early, because what you need is either the volunteer army, which is one of the ones you're going to pick it for, the arsenal of democracy, or a New Deal, which are the other 2 that you're likely to pick freedom for. So New Deal, this one is, actually I didn't think very much of this tenet until Arvius has done some really, really cool work working through some New Deal builds. Basically with a New Deal build, you're going to do 2 things. You're going to be planting engineers throughout the game. So anytime you generate an engineer, you're going to be planting them. You'll probably end up purchasing a couple engineers with faith and planting them as well. What you're trying to do is very centralized production, generally out of your capital, generally with something like Alhambra and Brandenburg, so that you're getting quadruple promoted land units and triple promoted air units, and you're getting them very, very quickly out of your capital, so that they're very, very strong units that are produced very, very quickly. So this is a centralized production type of thing. And the other thing you're probably going to want to do if you go New Deal is you're probably going to want to open up piety, because you want to be able to purchase great people the important great people, and you want to be getting all of those great profit, whatever the site is called when you plant the great profit, so that you're actually getting 4 of the appropriate yield. To make this a worthwhile T2 tenant that you are actually planning to go, you need a fairly decent number of great people planted. So this is probably one of the few grand strategy decisions where freedom really comes out ahead, is this is something to do. And you have a very specific kind of mindset with this. You're doing that centralized production with a military backing of what you're trying to produce out of that. Arsenal Democracy, this is a nice T2 tenant, but again, I don't think it's the Volunteer Army and the New Deal have very, very clear reasons to pick freedom. Those are a timing push or a last-ditch defense and a grand strategy win. Arsenal of Democracy, this is okay. The 15 influence for gifting military units to city-states is really nice, especially if you've done something like a lot of times on your way to getting like research labs, for example, you'll have picked up metallurgy, and you'll be able to build Lancers. And Lancers are only 123 costs. By the time you're getting up to research labs, and when a lab is 335 or something, this is a fairly cheap amount of production you're spending for this unit. And it's an obsolete military unit, but you can produce them relatively quickly and gift them away, for example. So this has some utility if you already own a bunch of city-states and you are trying to keep them. For example, if you're Germany or Portugal or something like this, this is okay. And the 15% production when building military units is nice as well. Overall, this is a fairly good tenet, but I'm not sure that it is in of itself worth picking freedom for, because really you've got to be looking at your grand strategy when you're picking freedom. And freedom is fairly vulnerable. It doesn't have a lot of happiness in it. Its T1 tenants aren't really that game-changing, and there's only a couple T2 tenants that are really all that game-changing, and they're very specific circumstances to use them. T3 tenants, 34% tourism when you broadcast tower, okay, but you don't win tourism in No Quitters multiplayer by built hard tourism. You win with futurism tourism, so I can't imagine that being that useful. 4 influence with trading with city-states, yeah, that sounds really nice, but I have a hard time imagining a situation where this actually arrives on the scene early enough to do anything. And purchasing spaceship parts with gold, this is probably the best T3 tenant freedom has for multiplayer No Quitters group, but even then it's fairly rare that you get into the errors where you're purchasing spaceship parts. Science wins, science wins games, but the science win condition of launching all the spaceship parts together is pretty rare that it happens. Yeah, again, I don't see you having the extra tenants to pick up space procurements. I don't see you actually getting that at all. Mostly when I open freedom, I tend to only get 3 policies in it. Autocracy, I end up getting between 3 and 5, sometimes even 6, and sometimes I finish a T3 tenant if I have the cultural for it. Freedom, I almost always only get 3, and it's because I have a very specific mindset when I'm going for freedom. I'm either doing New Deal or I'm doing Volunteer Army. All right, let's move on to order. Talk through these ones again. Hero of the people, this is the same as avant-garde. This is fine. This is 25% great people. Basically, if you're going to pick up this tenant, you're making the decision between, am I happy enough that I don't need 2 T1 happiness tenants, or do I need two T1 happiness tenants? So rate it with 25% great people, nice. 2 happiness for monuments, that's great. I mean, that's just exactly what it sounds like. It's 2 happiness per city. Skyscrapers, this is surprisingly good. It's situationally good, but it's still surprisingly good. This is the building equivalent of mobilization. It's a 33% modifier. It has the same stacking deals with commerce and Big Ben. So basically, if you have skyscrapers plus mercantilism, which is the commerce social policy, and you have Big Ben, your buildings only cost 40% of their total value. So you can do things like purchase research labs. And sometimes I've seen, I played a game with Zemth recently where this happened, where one of the strategies people go is they go order, and then they purchase their research labs, so that they get, when they hit research lab tech, they're immediately getting the full benefit from research labs, and that allows them to multiply their science very, very efficiently, very, very quickly. Patriotic War, this is actually worse than it sounds. It sounds very much like the Shoshone bonus of 15% combat strength, but it's not. It's literally an attack bonus. So you don't get 15% defense when fighting in your territory. It's only 15% attack. I don't like this. There's just better T1 tenants. You're either going to, Hero of the People is a better tenant than that. Both the happiness policies are better tenant than that. And Skyscrapers is situationally a better tenant than that. Double agents, spies are twice as likely to capture enemy spies attempting to steal a technology. I don't know why it's capture here and kill in the flavor text. Either way, stopping enemy spies. This is okay. I have a hard time devoting resources to this because in all likelihood you're not getting a lot of spy steals on you throughout the game anyways, especially once you already have, especially from the time you pick up the ideology through when you're going to get the rest of the spies actually stealing. But it will boost the chance. So basically my understanding of spy steal is that a unpromoted spy has a 33% chance to kill spies stealing from you. Promoted level 2 spy is 30, I think it's 36, and a level 3 spy is 40%. So those are the base chances to kill enemy spies. And if this actually doubles it as it suggests, that's pretty big. That means it goes up to, what is it, 66 and then 74 and then 80% chance to kill spies, which is a very high percentage. So if you're way ahead in science and you know everyone is spying on you, this is a thing that is at least potentially a pickup that matters. Young Pioneers is a very nice one. This is basically, it's a little more delayed. So the monuments, everyone's going to have a monument. All your cities are going to have monuments. So that's 2 happiness instantly. It's very likely that most of your cities will have a workshop and a factory by the time you pick this up. So it's likely that this is 2 happiness as well, and this leads to the option for 3 happiness per city. The nice thing about the order happiness tenets are they're both T1. So if you pick up order, you get these bonuses, these happiness bonuses immediately, unlike the autocracy bonuses, which are bigger, but one of them is a T2 tenet and the other one comes from the wonder. Oh shit, I didn't talk about... Alright guys, let's do one more thing about freedom while I'm thinking about it, because I actually just totally missed something. The other really powerful part about freedom is the Statue of Liberty. This is a very, very, very good ideology wonder. It can be built, it doesn't require any coastal stuff, so there's no restriction on that. It gives +1 production per specialist, and freedom already has benefits for specialists. First of all, rationalism, secularism, everyone gets that, and freedom is particularly good at taking advantage of secularism. Second of all, there's the one that gives you the extra food off specialists that wouldn't be there otherwise, and then Statue of Liberty. This makes working specialists very, very, very nice. It's also right on the tech path for plastics, so everyone ends up getting replaceable parts. It also means if you go freedom, you better have an engineer ready to go to engineer Statue of Liberty, because if anyone else goes freedom, it's going to be very available and very heavily contested. Sometimes Prora isn't because it's coastal, and Kremlin is basically never contested, because we'll talk about that in just a second. But Statue of Liberty is very highly contested. All right, let's go back to the order discussion. I forgot about that while I was in freedom. All right, and then the local happiness for every national wonder. That's what we've been talking about. It's a very consistent, like 4 to 6 happiness, but it's not as good as Young Pioneers or social realism in terms of, or socialist realism in terms of the actual happiness bonus. Academy of Sciences, 1 happiness for observatory, public school, and research lab. This is realistically between 2 and 3 happiness per city, but you almost never get this because the opportunity cost is too high. This is not why you choose order. If you need the happiness, you go for the T1 tenets, and there's a very specific T2 tenets you're looking for in order. Again, plan on something between 3 to 5 tenets for each ideology, because you need to be filling out rationalism as well. So if you're going 3 to 5 tenets, you're going to pick up 2 to 3 level 1s and 1 to 2 level 2s, and the level 2s you want to pick up are going to be extremely important. So Academy of Sciences, it's okay, but the opportunity cost is too high. Party leadership is garbage. This is +1 production, food, science, growth, and culture per city, and this arrives so late in the game that 1 food, production, science, gold, and culture per city doesn't impact the game. Who cares? That's so garbage. Don't ever pick that up. However, resettlement is even worse. If for some reason when you enter the modern era, or after you built 3 factories, you're founding cities, your cities will start with an extra 3 production. Or excuse me, extra 3 population. Who cares? Like, that's so bad. Don't ever pick that up. That helps no one ever. Cultural Revolution, 34% tourism to other order civs. Again, in no quitters multiplayer games on quick speed with the multiplayer as it is, you pretty much don't win generating hard tourism. If you win by tourism, you win by futurism. It's very unlikely that this will ever be a helpful tenet for you. Workers' facilities or faculties, this is really good. Factories increase science output by 25% and build factories in half the time. There's 2 ways to take advantage of this that are kind of interesting. The first is if you get your ideology by entering in the modern era. So if you enter through radio, what you can do is then head back to industrialization, get your coal online, and build your factories, and then those factories are built where they have that bonus to production that is given, so they're half the cost basically, and that's pretty decent. Really, what the huge bonus from this is the science output, but you can really maximize the ways in which you take advantage of not having to put all those same hammers into the factories. There's some really kind of cool games I've played against players who have taken workers' faculties, and they've done this generally when they're in a position of already really good science and they're basically making their science lead ridiculous. So if you have a lot of observatory cities, a lot of mountain cities, good science, then you can sometimes go in this way and really just kind of seal the game in terms of the ridiculous science return you're making. The other kind of T2 tenet that really matters for order, this is one of them, workers' faculties. The other T2 tenet that really matters is 5-year plan. This one is very, very powerful. The 2 production per city is okay, it's not great, but it is something. You know, it's compared to this one, it's still double the utility out of this in all likelihood. But it's only 2 production per city, that's not the end of the world. But the 1 production for every mine and quarry adds up very, very quickly, especially if you have built mines and quarries in your cities. That is, we're going to talk a little bit about choosing between these again at the end of this video, but let's get through the rest of these. The T3 tenets, they don't do anything to T3 tenets for order. They're very bad. 34 tourism to civilizations that have less happiness. I mean, that would be fine if you ever built hard tourism, but you don't build hard tourism, so it's not something that matters in no quitters multiplayer games. Iron Curtain, this sounds really good, it's actually really bad. You get a free courthouse upon city capture. Okay, I believe this is the one. Let me just check my spreadsheet for this. I think this is the one where you have to do it on. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, so there's a hidden downside to this. There's 2 hidden downsides to this ability. Reading this sounds fairly good. In actuality, it's fairly bad for 2 reasons. The first is the free courthouse upon city capture. If you take that city, to get the free courthouse, you have to annex it immediately. You know, when it gives you the option between puppet, annex, raise, or liberate, you have to click annex right then on that turn, which means that you're going to have 9 turns or 8 turns of whatever of revolution resistance where it doesn't do anything. You know, it's based on the size of the city clearly, but and I guess that doesn't matter. If you're getting the free courthouse, then it's not increased happiness, it's the same unhappiness as puppeting it. But if sometimes, a lot of times, I will just by habit puppet cities and then kind of later be like, oh, I want to annex this one and make it into something. Well, if you do that, if you think in that kind of process, you don't get the free courthouse, so you have to annex the city upon capture. The other thing is, this internal trade routes provide 50% more food or production. That's really misleading, because the way that the trade routes calculate their food or production is they have a base rate of some value. I think it's like 2 or 3 for food on a caravan. That base rate is then added to each era. So it's basically like X plus X per era. And the modifier, the 50% modifier, only modifies the base rate. So I think I did this in one game the first time I tried this, and I was getting, and I had like my caravans were like sending for like 8 food, right? And I clicked this thinking I'd get 4 more food out of the caravan, so they'd be up to 12 food, and I think it went from 8 food to 9 food, or 8 food to 9.5 food, because I think basically what it did, I think the base on the caravan is 3 food, and it multiplies the base rate and not the entire rate. So the modifier is applied early and it doesn't help. So basically this is a lot less than it actually says. It's more like 25% or 20% of instead of a 50% bonus, which is really, really discouraging. Spaceflight pioneers, okay, you can finish spaceship parts with great engineers. Okay, it's unlikely you're going to have a lot of faith left to purchase great engineers if you are already able to purchase great scientists, but okay, whatever. And a great engineer and a great scientist appear outside the capital. Yeah, that's nice. It does push the counter back, so it is more delayed before you get other great scientists or great engineers, but it's okay. But again, these T3 tenets are not very strong. It's unlikely that you'll have the social policies to be getting lots of T3 tenets, and even if you did have the social policies, it's probably better spent somewhere else instead of these 3, because these 3 are particularly weak for multiplayer games. Let's talk a couple other things that you should be paying attention to when you're picking your ideologies. You should be thinking about how you're going to win. Are you going to win with a timing push? If you're going to win with a timing push, what unit is it? You should be thinking about things like, what's your gold per turn? Have you built a lot of trading posts to maximize your gold per turn? Have you built a lot of mines? And thinking about things like, are the order mine bonuses going to help you? Is 5-year plan going to help you? Or is mobilization going to help you? Are you going to have the money to realistically be purchasing lots of units? Or do you need a timing push for things like volunteer army? You know, you should be thinking about the type of situation that you're going to encounter in the late game and how you're going to be able to take advantage of that. So Autocracy, as I've been talking about, does a very, very good job at overwhelming in a very short period of time with a very specific unit. Order does a very good job of kind of surviving that the distributed production. So autocracy, the kind of primary resource that autocracy takes advantage of late game is gold. And that gold is a very finite resource. It's very hard to fight a long, drawn-out war versus multiple players with just gold. You need production as well. Order tends to be very distributed production because the bonuses from 5-year plan and having lots and lots of cities, which is another reason you pick up order because you need that kind of happiness from that, is it leaves an empire that has a lot of production in the empire overall, but no one city has ridiculous production. So your production is very distributed. That makes you fairly resistant to things like nuking and pillaging and losing a city here or there. It means that you are kind of like an endurance strategy. You guys have probably seen, if you watch any of my videos, you've seen Yoris utilize this before, where he basically absorbs whatever hits are coming his way and just hopes to outlast them and allow order to take advantage of that. Okay. Freedom, the new land, or the New Deal landmark improvements, basically, with that super centralized production. That's another production strategy, but it's a strategy based on very, very centralized, very, very high promoted units. It's very, very vulnerable to things like nukes. If you lose those entire improvements, you're losing huge chunks of your production. Very centralized, but again, that can be a very strong strategy. Yeah, so we've talked about grand strategy, we talked about happiness, we've talked about culture in terms of cultural victories. We talked a little bit about cultural income. Again, you should be thinking about your cultural income. You're going to want to finish rationalism in the games you're playing. You want to be able to faith purchase great scientists. You want to be able to get the free tech off scientific revolution when you finish, it's actually the closer for rationalism is the free tech, but yes, when you finish all the way through that. And you'd like to get free thought fairly early if you can, which means if you have bad social policy generation, you probably want to think about ideologies that are going to give you their bonus in the first 2 to 3 tenets in that ideology instead of 5 tenets. So it's no good thinking, well, I would like the happiness from autocracy and I'd like the 25% military production. That's 5 tenets. It's no good thinking that if you realistically cannot put 5 tenets in autocracy. So your social policy income, your cultural income is very important to think about. If you have limited cultural policy income, then what you should be thinking about is what can I get the most bang for my buck for with only like 1 or 2 or 3 pickups? How can I maximize my ability to win without going very deep into these ideologies? What else? When you're picking your ideology, you should be aware of what other people have picked. So it may make a strategy. You might have been planning on doing mobilization, and two people pick autocracy, and suddenly you have no free tenants in autocracy. Well, that might not make a difference. If the only thing you care about in autocracy is mobilization, that's 1 point on a T1 policy. Yeah, you lose a lot of other benefits for going that way, but that might have been the strategy you want to go with and win, and that's okay. However, if you were kind of thinking, you know, I'd really like the happiness from autocracy, and I'd really like the military production from autocracy too, a 25% military production and extra promotions, but 2 people have gone autocracy, that suddenly is a big difference because that was 5 policies in. You wanted the happiness T2 policy and you wanted the production T2 policy. That means you need 3 T1 policies. That's five cultural picks into that. And if you're not going to get those 2 free ones, that becomes a pretty big deal. Finally, kind of the last thing I want to talk about and related to ideologies, I want to talk about world ideology. This one is very scary because I've been in a situation before where I picked up order and I went order for the happiness because basically my cities I had a large enough empire, I'd taken over some other people's lands, I had a large enough empire that my happiness was a big issue. And late game, I'm like, you know, order has a lot of instant available happiness. I picked up order specifically for that. And actually, in this case, I couldn't have defended against this because I was first adopter. So I picked up order before anyone else picked up any ideologies. And then I ended up in a 2v1 situation. I'm thinking about a specific game here. Ended up in a 2v1 situation. Both my opponents took freedom, and both my opponents passed. They basically had more gold than I did, so they had more city-states than I did. And what they did with this gold and city-states is they passed world ideology freedom. And that suddenly meant that I was getting ideology pressure. I'm going to do a video talking about ideology pressure in a little bit, but one of the things that you should worry about when you're picking your ideology is if you're using your ideology for happiness, then you should be really aware of the likelihood of getting an enemy ideology, a different ideology, passed as world ideology. Because if that happens, you are going to be taking a huge amount of pressure. So if you're thinking about, okay, I need an ideology only for happiness, and I need an ideology that is going to allow me to survive world ideology, then really what you should be thinking about is autocracy. And you should be thinking about autocracy with futurism and autocracy with the T2 tenet that gives you 6 happiness, local happiness per city, because that's pretty much the only set of tenets that allows you to survive world ideology happiness pressure. If you go order and you have those 2 T1 tenets with happiness, it's less total happiness. You don't get access to prayer. You don't get futurism to help counteract the effects of world ideology. And you can very quickly find that you picked up these tenets to go happy, and you actually are losing more happiness because you have an opposing ideology to the world ideology. So you should be aware of what your opponents are likely to pick up and what they're likely, and if they're able to pass a world ideology vote. It's really nice if you're like in a 6-player game and everyone's still alive and you're picking up like 3rd ideology and 2 ideologies have already gone. That's a pretty good place to be in, because right then you can pick the ideology that you want, because it's unlikely with 6 people that they're all going to end up on one ideology. If you're in like a 3-player game where like everyone is dead except there's 3 of you, it suddenly gets a lot more scary, especially if you don't control the Congress, because that is a devastating downside of picking up an ideology. So I guess I should clarify that. You don't take ideology pressure until you have an ideology yourself. So you're not going to get the unhappiness that's generated from ideology pressures until you get an ideology of your own. But when you get that, when you pick up your ideology, you're immediately getting pressured by enemy ideologies. All right. This is a complicated subject. It's a little difficult to give a guide of what is best and when is best. It's kind of more along the lines of you need to be doing some thinking for yourselves when you're in these situations. What am I trying to accomplish? And then I can just kind of outline the tools that are available in these different ideologies to accomplish your goals. But you guys really have to be sitting there going, what are my goals here? What do I need for this? And then I can kind of be like, okay, point you in the direction of this ideology, or this ideology really has those tools to get done what you need getting done. And I can do some things like tell you about some of the hidden downsides of these ideologies, like the internal trade route one for order. But in general, this is going to be your decision in your games, and hopefully this talking through these as a group here, talking through these in these videos, is going to help you guys make those decisions. So anyways, hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you like it, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitch, check out my games, support me, and come watch my videos. And good luck, guys. Have fun. Filthy out.